Welcome, guys, to another episode on the Extra Mile. My name is Alex, and welcome to the second episode in AMS2 week. Although we will cheat just a little bit today because we will feature not one but two sims, obviously Automobilista 2 and Assetto Corsa, and we will compare this lovely car, the 1974 Carrera RSR 3.0. Lovely car. To bring a little bit of variety into the episodes, we will not revisit Laguna Seca, even though I know it's Yoshi's favorite track, but we will visit the Nürburgring GP circuit. Why not the Nordschleife? Because we have great variation of corners on the GP track, and we can focus on each corner and the different in the sim. We have short, slow chicanes, very fast chicanes. We have long banked corners. We have all kinds of different cornering types, hairpins, and we can compare these corners in the sim. It's a little bit tricky at the ring when you have over 100 corners to exactly compare the differences between each sim. So let's go right ahead. We will use the default setup in both sims. We will compare 4 different aspects: sound, visuals, force feedback, and physics. I think that's reasonable. That's the big bullet points that we all are interested in. How does it sound? How does it look? How does it feel in the wheel? And is the handling somewhat realistic? Obviously, when it comes to the last point, the handling, this is a very subjective thing, and I sadly have never driven a real 1974 RSR Porsche. So this is a little bit of conjecture. There is a certain way that I expect the car to handle, and I can only give my subjective opinion if this is realistic or not realistic. Anyway, let's start off with the sound. While we have a little bit of fun warming up the tires here. So, when we talk about the sound, I think it's a little bit unfair to AMS2 to only talk about the engine sound, because there's more to this. There's the tire noise as well that gives you an idea of how far away or over the limit you are. Then we have the engine sound. To be honest, I know that it's very, very, very difficult to reproduce what you actually hear in the car with a sample-based sound engine. Ideally, what you can get to is what a YouTube video of the real car would sound like, but that still is not anywhere close to what you would feel and hear in the real thing. I hope you know what I mean with that. It does sound like a Porsche Flat 6. But again, it is not as visceral as I would like it to be. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement on that front. Okay, so let's focus a little bit more on the visuals, and this is where things start to improve rapidly. I am recording this in 4K with pretty much maxed out settings, not quite maxed out, but almost. And it looks and runs really well. It looks very crisp, very clean. It is, if you would say that 10 is absolutely photorealistic in terms of a point scale, then we're not quite there yet, but then again, we shouldn't expect that to happen. It's just not possible yet. But I would say that games like very modern racing games, for example, Gran Turismo 7, which is not out yet, but which we've seen gameplay of, gets a bit closer to that ultimate goal of photorealism. But I can't really fault AMS2 in the graphic department. I think it's a very good looking sim. I don't miss anything here. I would rate the visuals at a solid 8 out of 10. And it already has improved over the course of its short life. It gets better and better with each patch. And I love that. I love when devs care for their product post-release and keep on improving it, and not just release DLC after DLC, which you have to pay for, but actually improve the simulation. Yes, come on, come on, come on! Oh, yes, to the other side. Yeah, very, very, very good. Again, the visuals, I have nothing to complain about on that front. I think it's a very good looking sim. So then we move over to force feedback. And that is where things really, really start to shine. Especially at the limit, when you start to play with the car, when you start to drive over curbs, when the car even jumps over curbs a little bit and loses a little bit of contact like that. It's awesome. You feel everything in the wheel. It's such a satisfying feeling. And that is really what sells the car to me here in this sim, is the force feedback. It's not the sounds, and it's not necessarily the handling either. We will get to that in a second. It's the force feedback. Slide, come on. Yes. I love it. I love it. It feels so good. And when you're in extreme situations like this and spin out of control, it just helps you with the oversteer, and not in a gamey way. It feels relatively natural when the wheel starts to self-correct a little bit. But it still gives you that additional layer of feedback that you wouldn't get in a regular car. But of course, which we need in a sim because we don't have G-forces. It does a very, very, very good job. It feels very well balanced. And I would rate the force feedback at a solid 9 out of 10. I just shy away from the 10 out of 10 because there's always a way to improve on things. But I don't miss anything here in the force feedback. I think it's very well weighted. It feels very detailed. I always know what the car is doing and is supposed to do. Again, jumping over curbs like that, it just feels awesome. So yeah, force feedback is definitely an area where this sim shines. He says while widely spinning out of control. Alright, now it's time to start talking about the handling. And obviously we will do a couple of hot laps here now, just to see how quick the car is. Missed my apex by quite a bit there. But yeah, the handling. First thing that you notice when you drive this car here in AMS2 is how uneventful it is, I would say. Meaning that it's not a wild buffalo that you kind of have to tame because the tail starts to slide all the time. If you don't provoke the rear end, if you drive it normally, you don't have that many issues with oversteer. It feels, yeah, relatively tame, and more so than I would have expected. Again, if you think of mid-70s 911s, they have that that infamous reputation of being, well, very tricky to handle, very tricky to drive. And I don't feel that here at all. It feels it feels relatively modern and relatively safe. You can feel the weight at the back, but only when you want to, meaning only when you want to kind of break into the corner a little bit and get the rear end to rotate. Let's show that off right here. I stepped on the brake a little bit and the rear end started to rotate. Did that at the wrong time, but you get what I mean. The rear end doesn't step out unless you want it to. It doesn't surprise you. It's not like, oh my God, what's the car doing right now? It's not like you have to react to the car sliding around all the time. It pretty much does what you want it to do. Now, is that realistic? I don't know. The real car is not that powerful. It only has 330 horses, meaning power oversteer will not necessarily be a thing that you experience in this car in every turn. It also has racing slicks at the back, which are pretty wide, and it only weighs 980 kilos. So I don't know, getting the rear to slide out might not necessarily be such an easy thing in the rear car. So this actually might be realistic. A very grippy, lightweight, very predictable, very safe chassis to build a race car on. Is it fun though? Yes, definitely it is fun. It is a lot of fun. And mostly, and I've said that in the last episode as well, mostly because of this awesome force feedback system that just gives you the feeling of actually driving a car. And it gives you so much feedback that you know what the car is doing. It's just awesome. It sells the car. The force feedback sells the car to me. So it definitely is fun. It is fun to hot lap. I haven't even raced it yet, but I bet it is fun to race as well because it is so easy to control at the limit. Now, mind you, I'm driving with a default setup here, meaning this is a relatively safe setup. It might very well be that if you really tweak the setup a little bit to get the last second out of it, that it starts to become a little bit more twitchy, that it starts to become a little bit more unpredictable and aggressive. But with this setup, it's not a scary car at all. Not at all. Okay, so let's see. Lap time. 2:21. That doesn't sound very fast, does it? But that's the result. The last lap was actually the fastest lap, which makes sense. So now we will jump into Assetto Corsa and yeah, check out the car there. I'm actually very curious now. I haven't driven this car in Assetto Corsa in a long time. And I don't know what to predict. I have no idea what will happen. So anyway, guys, let's jump over into Assetto Corsa and see what happens. Okay, here we go. Oh, yes. All right, let's start in the same order. Let's talk about the sound first. On first glance, it does sound a little bit more meaty, a little bit more realistic. It's not a huge difference, though. This has the same issue, in my opinion, as does the sound in AMS2. It's that it's still a little bit gamey. Ooh, it's not very realistic, but I think I prefer this one. But just by a touch, it's not a huge difference. Let's listen to it on the straight from low revs. It's not bad. noticing very clearly that the tire noise is completely drowned out here in Assetto Corsa by the engine sound. There's a little bit there, but not very much. That surprises me, actually. I didn't remember it like that. There's a little bit of tire noise, and wow, this is a sign of things to come when we get to the handling section. That's very interesting, very interesting. And it's actually kind of hard to pick a favorite. They're very close together. Initially, I wanted to say that I prefer this one, but now I'm not too sure. It's very close. I would say the sound is a tie, especially since the tire noise is very quiet, although I probably could adjust that somewhere in the content manager and make it a little bit louder. Ooh, interesting, interesting. But we're not in the handling section yet, Alex. Keep it calm. But yeah, so sound, honestly, I would give it a tie. I think they both have room for improvement. That's without question. And I don't think there's a clear winner here. Alright, next up, visuals. So obviously we are using modded Assetto Corsa, which is a completely different ball game from the vanilla version, with a lot of features added. Some visual, some are related to physics even, some are related to force feedback. It's an improvement across the board. Content Manager basically turns this game into Assetto Corsa 2, and that is not really an exaggeration either. So, there are a few issues that I keep having with the Content Manager, and that's mainly because there's so many settings, there's so many post-processing filters to choose from, there's so much that you can do to tweak the sim that it's very easy to get very good results. I mean, I think this looks really, really, really good, but there are some issues specifically here in this car, over this current setting that I have. The lighting in the cockpit is just a little bit too dark. Everything outside looks great, but it's pretty dark here on the inside. You can't really see. So if you guys have any tips how to solve that, I keep fiddling with the settings. I keep trying new post-processing filters, but I didn't really have that wow moment where I thought, okay, these are the settings, this is it, this is what I want to use. I keep fiddling with it about 1 or 2 hours every week, just to see if I can improve the game. And to be honest, it's a lot of fun to try new post-processing filters, to try new settings, and to just see it evolve. It's part of the fun for me. All of that being said, this is a very, very good-looking sim. I would say, again, there's not a huge difference between the two. Of that being said, which one do I prefer? That's a tough question to answer because they are very close. When it comes to the track, to the scenery that I see in front of me, they are both very, very close. I couldn't really pick a winner in the sense that one sim is clearly better than the other. Maybe if you squeeze every bit of visual fidelity out of the Content Manager and really know how to use it, and I still don't, let's make that very clear. I know a lot now about the Content Manager, but there are still things that I don't quite get, and where I could still improve. But let's say you could squeeze every bit of visual fidelity out of it, then I'm sure it would look better than AMS2 does right out of the box. But that comes at a cost. You have to work with the content manager a little bit. You can't just pick the ultra setting and everything will be awesome. You have to pick a post-processing filter. You have to go through the settings. There's a little bit of work involved. That being said, if you are the type of person who likes to do that, and I am, I like to spend an hour or two just trying different filters, different settings, play with it, and I usually end right where I started, with a decent result like this one, where the cockpit is a little bit too dark, but it's still fun. But yeah, so just so you know, if you use Assetto Corsa with a content manager, you have to be prepared to go through some settings, look through some tutorials, and work with it a little bit. AMS looks very good. It's a very solid experience right out of the gate. So to summarize the visuals, I would say it's another tie. One sim is not clearly better looking than the other, and especially AMS gives you a pretty high level of visual quality right out of the box. You don't have to do anything, just have to say high settings and bam, there it is. Assetto Corsa with the content manager needs a little bit more work to get there. So I would say, for me personally, it's another tie. Alright, so far a pretty boring comparison. We have two ties and two categories, but trust me, now we start to see things differ vastly. Force feedback. So, again, the force feedback is enhanced by the content manager. There are quite a few more options that you can tick, a few more settings that you can use, and I have ticked the boxes and used the settings. I've tried to calibrate the force feedback to my wheel, which is a direct drive wheel, and I got pretty good results. I'm pretty happy with it, to be honest. That being said, it can't compete with the force feedback in AMS2. It's not even close, and I'm being serious here. The force feedback is good. It gives you a lot of feedback, but there are also a lot of movements that are just not quite right, that I would still maybe need to filter out. It just doesn't feel as coherent as the force feedback in AMS does. For example, it can be a little bit light around the center. It just doesn't feel as connected as the force feedback in AMS does. But then again, when you start to slide in a corner or you drive over curbs, you get quite a lot of force feedback. And I know all of that can be adjusted, and I did adjust the force feedback for a long time. The tricky thing here in Assetto Corsa is that the force feedback adapts to the car that you drive, so you might adjust it with one car and it feels great, and you jump into another drift car, let's say, and it's way too strong. So it's a little bit, while it is a good thing that the force feedback feels different in every car, and it does in AMS2 as well, the spread is so large that you almost have to adjust the force feedback for not every individual car, but you might want to adjust it between some cars at least a little bit, so the force feedback is strong enough, not too weak or not too strong. So overall, right out of the gate, the force feedback in AMS2 felt great. It felt heavy, it felt connected, you get feedback about what the car is doing. Here in Assetto Corsa, it is good, but it is not that good. And the difference is noticeable. If the force feedback in AMS were, let's say, a 10, I would say this is 7.5, maybe an 8 if you get the settings just right. And here we are again. If you want to get the best out of Assetto Corsa, you have to tweak it, you have to fiddle with it, you have to understand the settings in Assetto Corsa, you have to understand the settings in the content manager, because now you have two pages where you can adjust settings. It's not just one, and you have to tweak it to get the best result, and you have to be prepared to do that in order to enjoy the sim and get the most out of it. So even if you do that, and again, I have spent quite a lot of time on some weekends just fiddling with the force feedback, because I always thought, I know that it can be better, so let's just go through every single setting once again, switch everything off, go through them one by one, see what they do, what they feel like, and try to combine all of the different settings into one force feedback profile that I enjoy. And I've done that several times. It still isn't as good as the force feedback in AMSs. And it's not even close. Now we get to the last part, the most interesting part. So let's try to drive a few clean hot laps. 2 minutes 21.1 is the time to beat. Whoa, braking point seems to be a bit different. And there is a very, very clear difference in the handling of the two cars. So let me try to explain what I mean. Whoa, the rear end is much, much more sensitive to steering inputs. For example, let's try to get it out here. It's much easier to slide the car, and it's much trickier to hold the slide, meaning it drives like I said in AMS, like I would expect it to drive. It's a bit more difficult, it's a bit more challenging. And by the way, that doesn't mean that this is better or more real. I want to make that very clear, because I have no idea what is better or more real, because I haven't driven the real car. But it fits better to what I would expect the car would feel, if that makes sense. So you have to be a little bit more careful. There's not that much mechanical grip at the rear end. Let's try again to provoke a bit of a slide. It definitely can happen, oversteer can happen, but it is much, much trickier to keep the car in line, and therefore it is more of a challenge. You have to be a bit more awake, a bit more attentive to get the most out of this car. That being said, there's still a lot of similarities. It's very stable under braking. It still has the same amount of grip when you accelerate out of a corner. That third gear slide there, that would have, I wouldn't say that would have never happened in AMS2, but it would be, you would have to do more to provoke that slide. Turn in and understeer. There's still very little understeer, even in the car here in AC. When you turn in, even when you start to push it mid-corner, there's no understeer in this car, or very, very little understeer in this car. And that's the same in both sims. There's overall more similarity than there are differences, I would say. Oh, come on, brake, 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 brake. Very nice, very nice. Let's try to go for a clean lap here. Which one is more fun? Now we're getting to an interesting point. Honestly, AMS has it by just a little bit because of the force feedback. It gives me more control over the car. It gives me more confidence with the car. That might tie in a little bit to the setup and the physics engine or the tire model, whichever one it is, that makes the car in AMS2 a bit more planted and forgivable. But I have the feeling that I can be not faster, but more aggressive with the car in AMS2, have more fun with it. On the other hand, the car here in Assetto Corsa is a bit more challenging to drive. It's very interesting, but if I would have to choose one or the other to just have fun with, right now, I think I would go for AMS2. But again, it's close. So, both sims have their own interpretation of the same theme, which is in this case a 1974 Porsche Carrera RSR 3.0. And it's a lovely car. I mean, it's one of the greats. It's one of the best racing cars ever made. One of the most exciting racing cars ever made. Just because it's a raw driving machine. And I just love it. And both sims interpret this car in their own way. And I mean, in my opinion, there isn't really a better or worse sim in this case. It it depends a little bit on your individual preferences. I know that there will be a lot of comments that say I prefer AMS, and there will be a lot of comments that say I clearly prefer Assetto Corsa. So there is no right or wrong here. Oh my god, that was wrong actually. It didn't touch it. But yeah, it's a little bit difficult to I don't know summarize the result here. I can't really say, okay, this sim is clearly better than the other. I can't say that. AMS2 does a great job with the force feedback, especially. Assetto Corsa does a great job across the board, actually, especially with content manager and all the additions that brings. But yeah, if I had to pick a winner today, it would be a very slight advantage for AMS2, and that's mostly because of the force feedback. That's the biggest difference. Anyway, now it's time to check out the lap time. I've driven a couple of laps here, nothing too crazy, but just a solid pace. So let's see, 225.3. That makes total sense. It's over 4 seconds slower here in AC, and that's exactly how it felt. Less overall grip, especially at the rear. You had to be much more careful. So that definitely makes sense for what I felt in the wheel. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed watching. I hope if you have tried both sims, please let me know in the comments what you think. Maybe I have been talking complete BS. I don't know. That was just my subjective impression of the car. There will be another comparison episode coming up on Friday. I won't spoil the car yet, but some of you will already know which car it is. Yeah, this is it. See you in the next episode on Friday, guys. Bye-bye.